Progressive internationalist values are bringing about the destruction of Britain's unique cultural heritage, and it's easy to be able to see how this is happening. We'll begin with an article by American author and columnist Lionel Shriver in The Spectator. Shriver lives in the United Kingdom, and she wrote an article called "Would You Want London to be Overrun with Americans Like Me?" And this is an article where she talks about mass immigration. She's framing it in the context of the 20,000 Afghan refugees that we can expect in the coming months and years. She then reports Migration Watch's findings on immigration ahead of the 2021 census results that are going to be released. So quoting from the article, she says, "In Britain, Migration Watch released 2 reports this summer whose key findings I will try to present as succinctly and neutrally as possible. In the past 20 years, foreign-born residents of the UK have doubled to 9 million, going from 8% to 14% of the population. In tandem, the white British population has fallen from 89% to 79%, while ethnic minorities have grown from 10% to 21%. Since 2001, 84% of the UK population growth has been due to immigrants and their children, rising to 90% since 2017, the majority non-EU. More than a third of UK births now involve at least one foreign-born parent. In parts of London, 80% of births are to foreign-born mothers. Indeed, non-UK nationals are disproportionately concentrated in British cities. The majorities of London, Slough, Leicester and Luton have an ethnic minority background. About half the births in London, Birmingham, Manchester and Cambridge are to foreign mothers. Unsurprisingly then, a third of British school children are already from ethnic minorities. In 20 years, ethnic minority children will constitute more than half the students in state schools. As of 2018, 90% of immigrants were under 45. This means the ethnic transformation of the UK, whose white population is far older and destined rapidly to accelerate." So Shriver seems to dread delivering these statistics, even though they aren't mere facts, and you can see why given the politically correct cultural atmosphere we are mired in. The implication is obvious. There are dramatic ethnic shifts happening in the UK. As she points out though, it's not all about race. Kenyans resent Somali immigrants. Black South Africans resent Zimbabwean immigrants. Colombians resent Venezuelan immigrants. Anywhere where the proportion of the other, however they might be defined, crosses a critical and perhaps even quantifiable statistical line, people who are born in a place stop getting excited about the new ethnic restaurants and start getting pissed off. So what she's saying here is that race is actually not a specific, and race is not useful as a sort of specific term or method of framing of this debate. Ethnic group and cultural identity is far more useful because it's not about race. Like, race is just a misnomer when talking about this problem. She continues, "With no sense of irony, Mexicans resent the droves of American retirees who settle on their coasts, radically transforming the local culture and nattering along the beach exclusively in English. I'm sympathetic too. This is normal. Call them xenophobic if you will, but most people want to live around people like themselves. Most people are capable of hospitality towards foreigners who arrive in modest numbers, but bulk when the outsiders are so populous that they seem to be taking over. Most people of any race or religion do not like vast numbers of people entering their territory from elsewhere and making themselves permanently at home. This is not some sick, especially Western meanness. This is what human beings are like all over the world. The blithe welcoming of their own dwindling and loss of dominion, now demanded of Western majorities, is fundamentally inhuman." And again, I have to stress, I think that the reason that Lionel frames this in racial terms is because she's an American and they're used to thinking in those terms. As a European, I'm not used to thinking in those terms. And I also don't think that's really the problem. But she is right that it's not normal to have one's way of life disturbed in this way. It's not normal and it's not fair. After all, try reversing the paradigm. If white Westerners were emigrating in their tens of millions to developing nations, if Liverpudlians were pouring into Lagos, the left would decry mass immigration as neo-colonialism. And rightly so. Such white flight would be denounced as invasion, as it would be, Yet for today's left, non-white cultures must be protected, preserved and promoted, while evil European cultures deserve to be subsumed. That version of events is neither fair nor saleable. And that is the point, isn't it? This isn't fair to do to people. So has Lionel Shriver made an unreasonable set of points? And I was just no. I think that you could go anywhere in the world and find people in general upholding that worldview. We don't want our countries to be subsumed in foreigners because we don't recognise them, we don't understand them, we can't speak to them, at least not with any ease. This is not something that's desirable from anyone's point of view. These are distinctly human concerns, and all humans should be able to empathise with these concerns. And so we get to the left-wing response to this, which comes from Keenan Malik. Keenan Malik is a Guardian columnist, author and activist for what he considers to be internationalist Enlightenment values. And his response was purely along the lines of race. And it's quite possible that Lionel Shriver had set him up to be able to contain the entire argument within the framework of race. But it's not about race, as I will go on to demonstrate. He says, to be truly British, the country needs to stay largely white. Really, Lionel Shriver. Now, just to be clear, the country needs to stay largely British, as in indigenous British. That's what we're talking about. We're not talking about the colour of one's skin. Malik says, fears of white decline have returned in certain circles. Until recently, issues of white identity and of white decline were confined to the far-right fringes, where notions such as that of the Great Replacement, the belief that white people are being driven out of their homelands in inverted commas, flourished. The key word here is not white. The key issue is not white. And the idea there isn't a particular white identity in Europe, and in Britain that's certainly not what is being concerned about. We're concerned about the indigenous cultures of Britain and the United Kingdom that are somehow being displaced by mass immigration. There is a fantastic example of this in the Cockneys of London's East End, at least formerly of London's East End. Because where are the Cockneys now? They're not in the East End anymore. As we can see by this article on The Londonist, this is really a fantastic analysis of what's happened here. The term Cockney, as they say, dates back to the 1300s and was originally used as a pejorative label for the city's toffee-nosed urban folk. It's since become a term, in the 700 years since it was first used, become a term of endearment, primarily referring to the working-class, down-to-earth East Enders of London. But in 2010, Professor Paul Kurzweil of the University of York estimated that the Cockney accent would disappear from London within 30 years. 10 of those years have now elapsed. Is this native London breed set really to become brown bread? And what has triggered the mass exodus of these former city dwellers to the surrounding counties such as Essex and Kent? Think Cockney, and pearly kings and queens often spring to mind. The tradition, dating back to the Victorian costermongers, street traders, of North London, was founded by Henry Croft, a former workhouse inmate, who, inspired by the style-savvy costermongers who sewed lines of pearls into their clothes to mimic the rich, chose to go one step further by completely embellishing suits with pearl buttons. Diane Gould, the current pearly queen of St Pancras, reveals to me that she makes all her own outfits, a task typically left to the pearly kings. I ask her if there are many pearly families left. So it's worth pausing there for a moment, just to point out that what we're describing here is a unique indigenous native culture to the United Kingdom, specifically located in the East End of London, or was located in the East End of London. Right? This is not something from elsewhere. This is not something that you can call foreign. This is something we can categorically call native to the United Kingdom. So she says, there are at least a few of proper pearly stock, though there's plenty out there that can't be considered true pearlies as they're so watered down. She says, with some sadness in her voice, we're still alive and kicking, we're hanging by a thread. Why has that happened to them? Why does it have to happen that the Cockneys get displaced from London? I mean, growing up, that's where I thought Cockneys lived. The London accent I was expecting was the traditional Cockney accent and not the sort of post-Tony Blair London accent that you get now. Though Diane herself relocated to East Sussex some years ago, she claims she has by no means abandoned her Purley values. So she also has felt the need to leave London because of the way that London has changed. Again, without her consent and against her will. When I ask her why so many other Cockneys are upping sticks to move to counties outside of London, she replies with a rendition of My Old Man singing, "We had to move away because the rent we couldn't pay." Gould laments that there are a lot of people that had to move out of the capital due to a lack of affordability and scorns the destruction of streets of houses which forced many to move into blocks of flats on large estates. This, says Gould, shattered the backbone of the community. I'm part of the last of a dying breed. Just seems sad to me, that. Deeply sad. That a bunch of people who don't seem to have caused any harm or trouble to anyone feel that they have been driven out of what we can call their ancestral homelands. And I'm not going to put that in inverted commas, like Malik did. I think that is where the Cockneys originated and probably where they belong, isn't it? Many have fled Essex, as this article observes. Barbara Windsor, since her rise to fame, there has been a dramatic reconfiguration of who is and who speaks Cockney. Though East London is the spiritual home of the Cockney culture and accent may now be most prolific in Essex. Some families chose to leave the poverty and overcrowding in East London. Others lost their jobs through industrialisation, such as the closure of the London docks. I wanted to look at this confused sense of identity that was found in Debden. The Cockney identity is dwindling. Within 2 generations, there has been a dramatic decrease in those who consider themselves and their accents to be Cockney. Instead, young people believe they have an Essex accent, even though their accent was not noticeably diverged from the accent of their Cockney parents and grandparents. So already the very identity of what is a Cockney is being dissolved. It's being liquidated, just because they were forced to move out of where they lived. And it's not just financial or housing concerns that caused this. As one 2016 BBC documentary revealed, it was because they were being forced out by the number of immigrants that were coming in. In a broadcast called The Last Whites of the East End, the BBC took a look at this, and they said, while gentrification, rising house prices, and a lack of affordable housing and rising in-work poverty drive people further out of the capital and ravage the city, again, what is behind all of this? This is because of mass immigration that was began by the Labour government in 1997. Some in this documentary have focused their dislike on the area's increased diversity. Many reports have since implied this shows an irreversible, undesirable change in the area, that some intangible quality is being lost. And that's what this is really about. It's the aesthetic of what is and is not in that area, and what should and should not be. It is no longer aesthetically Cockney. It's no longer traditional. It's no longer about the heritage of the people there because they've been forced to flee. Because those invisible, intangible sort of relationship map that we put onto the world around us, that's attacked, that's damaged when people who don't match the expectations that we have are brought into an area. The show focuses on immigration in Newham over the last 15 years and claims people feel like foreigners in their own land as Cockney culture disappears. If this was happening to any other ethnic group, the left would be in arms about it, and rightly so. Native people should not be displaced from their native lands. That's just a truism that I think we can all agree with. A young mum called Leanne, for example, has decided to move to Essex to be among her own people, to the chagrin of her family who remain in the area, and Peter Bell, the secretary at the East Ham Working Men's Club, described the borough as a slum. He says, I mean no disrespect to the Muslim community, but I don't think they want to be a part of the traditions here. And that's the point, isn't it? These people didn't come to the East End of London to become Cockneys. They didn't come to integrate. And they are not reproducing Cockney culture. And that's making the Cockneys no longer feel like they are at home in their own homes. They feel like strangers in their own land, because the foreigners among them didn't want to integrate, and nothing was done to make them integrate. This is uncomfortable. It is unpleasant. And so when Malik says that the belief white people are being driven out of their homelands and has flourished, it's because it's happening. Like, it's actually happening. We've got an identifiable ethnic group, native ethnic group, that are saying and telling us, well, look, we feel like strangers in our own land. We don't like what's happened to us. We're going to have to leave. And no one has an ear of compassion for that at all.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.